she joked. "If you fix this engine, I'll marry you." 30 minutes later, she was speechless. The mechanic just smiled and returned to work, as if he'd taken the promise seriously. When the car started running again, her silence said more than 1,000 words. From that moment on, even she didn't know if it was just a joke or the beginning of something real. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. Sarah Morgan looked at her old 1965 Jaguar through the penthouse window, sighing deeply. The car, a relic inherited from her grandfather William, was more than just an automobile. It was the only authentic piece of her childhood that she still possessed. Even with the Morgan family's entire business empire under her command, nothing brought her as much comfort as that classic lined vehicle parked in her private spot. "It won't start again, will it?" asked Nancy, her personal assistant for more than a decade, organizing a stack of contracts on the coffee table. "No, I've tried for 3 days," replied Sarah, adjusting the pearl necklace that matched her impeccably tailored suit. The heiress of Morgan Enterprises sipped her coffee while mentally evaluating her options. At 30, she commanded one of the country's most solid companies, built by her grandfather and expanded by her father, who now enjoyed an early retirement in Europe. Under her management, the company had grown exponentially, but professional success only amplified the personal emptiness she carried. "I've contacted 3 specialized shops, but all would only have availability for next month," continued Nancy, always efficient. "There's Premium Auto Parts, but they're known for replacing original parts with modern replicas." "No," Sarah cut in firmly. "No replicas. This car remains original or it's not worth it." After several frustrating calls, Nancy found a shop that, despite lacking the glamour of the others, was known for honesty and technical knowledge, Jake's Auto Shop, located in a neighborhood away from the financial center. Sarah hesitated when she heard the address, but her desperation regarding the car spoke louder. That afternoon, Sarah dismissed her driver and took a taxi to the shop. The contrast between her executive attire and the environment full of tools, parts, and the characteristic smell of oil and metal couldn't have been greater. While waiting to be attended to, she observed the mechanics working on other vehicles, their skilled hands disassembling and reassembling engines with an intimacy she envied. There was something genuine about that place that she hadn't felt in the corporate environments she frequented for a long time. "Are you Sarah Morgan?" A calm voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned and found a man of approximately 35, wearing worn but clean overalls. His hands bore marks of years of work, but his brown eyes conveyed a serenity that seemed out of place in that environment. "Yes, I am," she replied, automatically extending her hand as she did in business meetings. "Ethan Reynolds," he introduced himself, returning the greeting after quickly cleaning his hand on a cloth. "I heard you have a 65 Jaguar with ignition problems." Sarah nodded, trying to disguise her anxiety. She explained the car's sentimental value, the frustrated attempts to make it work, and how important it was that everything be repaired without altering the vehicle's character. Ethan listened attentively, occasionally asking about technical details that she, surprisingly, knew how to answer thanks to long afternoons watching her grandfather in the garage. "I'll need the car brought here for a complete evaluation," he finally said. "I've already arranged for a tow truck. It should arrive in half an hour," replied Sarah, consulting her wristwatch. "How long do you think it will take to fix?" Ethan scratched his chin, thoughtful. "Without seeing the state of the engine, it's hard to say. It could be something simple like a distributor problem, or something more complex involving the original electrical system. I need it working for my father's birthday in 2 weeks," she said, unable to disguise the imperative tone she used with subordinates. "Is that possible?" A discreet smile appeared on Ethan's face. "I'll do my best, but I don't promise miracles. Old cars have their own time." That sincere answer, without empty promises or exaggerated guarantees, provoked in Sarah a strange mixture of frustration and respect. She wasn't used to hearing maybe as an answer. The tow truck arrived, bringing the dark green Jaguar, and Sarah couldn't help feeling a pang of anguish at seeing her precious car being unloaded like a serious patient in an emergency. Ethan circled the vehicle with an appreciative look. "It's an extraordinary piece," he commented, caressing the hood with a reverence that didn't go unnoticed by Sarah. "Your grandfather kept it very well preserved." "How do you know it was my grandfather's?" she questioned, surprised. "You mentioned the sentimental value, and you have knowledge that's only acquired by watching someone work." "I deduced it was an older male figure, probably a father or grandfather," explained Ethan, carefully opening the hood. Sarah felt something unusual, the sensation of having been really seen by someone, beyond the appearance and the name she carried. While Ethan examined the engine with the concentration of a surgeon, Sarah received an urgent call about an international negotiation. She stepped away a few paces, immediately assuming her executive tone and resolving the situation with her usual efficiency. When she returned, Ethan was observing her with a curious expression. "Seems like you have more important matters than this car," he commented with no judgment in his voice. "Nothing is more important than this car," replied Sarah, with a conviction that surprised them both. The silence that followed was interrupted only by the background noises of the shop. Ethan dived back into examining the engine, while Sarah fought against the impulse to check her emails on her phone. There was something about that man's presence that left her curiously uncomfortable. Not in a negative way, but as if he could see beyond the carefully constructed facade that she presented to the world. "If this car runs again, I'll marry you," Sarah blurted out jokingly, breaking the tension with the first impulsive comment she had made in years. The entire shop seemed to freeze. The other mechanics momentarily stopped their work, looking in their direction. Ethan raised his eyes from the engine, a grease stain on his cheek contrasting with his serious expression. "That's quite a commitment," he replied simply, before returning to work without showing any disturbance. Sarah felt her face burn. She didn't know what surprised her more, her own boldness or his calm response. She took a deep breath, trying to regain the emotional control she rarely lost. That's when Ethan made a small adjustment to the distributor, turned the ignition key, and the characteristic rumble of the engine echoed through the shop. The smile that illuminated the mechanic's face had a genuineness that Sarah hadn't seen in a long time in her social circle. For a moment, she forgot who she was, where she was, and simply shared that small victory with a stranger who had just awakened not only the Jaguar's engine, but something dormant within herself as well. How did you do it?" she stammered, approaching in disbelief. "Sometimes what seems complicated has a simple solution," replied Ethan, drying his hands on the cloth he always carried with him. "The distributor was misaligned, and there was a problem with the wiring, nothing that couldn't be solved with patience." Sarah felt a wave of gratitude and, at the same time, growing embarrassment over the joke she had made minutes before. Avoiding the eyes of the other employees, she asked about the cost of the service. "I need to make a few more adjustments before releasing the car," said Ethan. "If you can return tomorrow, it will be ready for pickup. As for the cost, we'll discuss that later." With no alternative, Sarah agreed to return the next day. She left the shop with hurried steps, but the strange sensation that encounter had provoked accompanied her throughout the journey back home. As the taxi wound through the city streets, she found herself recalling the details of that afternoon. The smell of the shop, the sound of the engine coming back to life, and mainly, the serenity in Ethan's eyes, a serenity that contrasted with the turbulence she now felt. For the first time in years, Sarah Morgan couldn't predict what would happen next in her perfectly planned life, and most surprisingly, a part of her was curiously relieved by that. Sarah barely slept that night. She tossed and turned in the king-size bed of her apartment, mentally replaying every detail of the meeting at the shop. The way Ethan had looked at the Jaguar with a respect that went beyond the monetary value of the vehicle, the way his hands, marked by hard work, delicately touched each component, the naturalness with which he had responded to her impulsive provocation. At 6 in the morning, she gave up trying to sleep and prepared coffee. From the panoramic window, she contemplated the city that was slowly awakening, while her mind remained fixed on the shop in the distant neighborhood. "What's happening to me?" she murmured to herself, trying to regain her usual control over her emotions. At the headquarters of Morgan Enterprises, Sarah conducted 3 consecutive meetings with her usual efficiency, but her assistant noticed something different. "Is everything okay, Sarah?" asked Nancy during a break. "You seem distant today." "Just tired," she replied automatically, adjusting the documents on the table. "That problem with Grandpa's car has me worried. Speaking of which, were they able to fix it?" Sarah felt a slight blush on her cheeks as she remembered the moment when the engine came back to life. "Partially. I need to pick up the car this afternoon. At 4 o'clock, Contrary to her meticulously planned schedule, Sarah cancelled a video conference with international investors and took a taxi toward the shop. She wore a less formal outfit than the day before, as if unconsciously trying to reduce the distance between her world and Ethan's. When she arrived, she found him polishing the Jaguar's hood, which gleamed under the afternoon light. Something about the scene, that man taking such loving care of something that meant so much to her, made her heart race in a way that no million-dollar contract ever had. "Good afternoon," she said, approaching with hesitant steps. Ethan raised his eyes and smiled, a simple smile without ulterior motives that illuminated his face in a way that Sarah found inexplicably beautiful. "Good afternoon, Ms. Morgan. Your car is ready." "Sarah," she corrected automatically. "You can call me Sarah," the mechanic nodded, running his hand through his dark hair in a gesture that denoted slight discomfort. "I did a complete review of the electrical system and replaced some worn components with original parts that I got from a collector. The engine is working perfectly now." Sarah approached the car, running her fingers over the impeccable bodywork. "It seems even shinier than before." "I gave it an extra polish," admitted Ethan. "Cars like this deserve all possible care." There was a moment of silence, filled only by the distant noises of the shop. Sarah realized she was procrastinating, mentally inventing excuses to prolong that meeting. "About yesterday," she began, feeling strangely vulnerable. "That joke about marriage, it was foolish. I'm sorry if it caused embarrassment." Ethan observed her with that same disconcerting calmness. "I wasn't offended. Actually, I found it interesting how people reveal truths in moments of lightheartedness." The answer caught Sarah by surprise. "What do you mean by that?" "That maybe you expressed, even in the form of a joke, a genuine desire for connection," he answered, returning to put away his tools. "But don't worry, I'm not holding you to any promise." There was a wisdom in his words that contradicted his apparent simplicity. Sarah felt exposed, as if that man she barely knew could read layers of her personality that even her closest friends couldn't access. "Do you always talk like this? As if you were analyzing people?" Ethan shrugged. "When you work fixing broken things, you learn to identify what really causes the problems, not just the symptoms." Sarah stared at him, intrigued. "And what do you think is broken in me?" A slight smile appeared on his face. "I didn't say there's something broken in you, but maybe there are parts that need maintenance, as in all of us." The conversation was interrupted by one of the other mechanics, who needed Ethan's help. Sarah took the moment to observe him interacting with his colleague, the respectful way he listened, the patient way he explained a procedure. There was an authenticity in him that contrasted drastically with the polished falsity she encountered daily in the corporate world. "How much do I owe for the service?" she asked when he returned. Ethan mentioned a surprisingly reasonable amount, considering the specialized work. Sarah insisted on paying more, but he politely refused. "I don't charge beyond what's fair just because the client can pay more," he explained. That wouldn't be honest. The integrity of that statement touched Sarah deeply. While signing the check, an impulsive idea arose in her mind. "Would you accept having coffee with me? To talk about the car, of course." The words came out before she could filter them, something unusual for someone as calculating as her. Ethan seemed genuinely surprised by the invitation. "Now?" "Yes, if it's not inconvenient," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. Ethan consulted the clock on the wall. "My shift ends in half an hour. If you can wait?" Sarah nodded, feeling an unexpected wave of happiness. She settled into a simple chair in the shop's waiting area, observing the movement of the place while Ethan finished his commitments. An environment so different from those she frequented, and yet there was an honesty there that made her feel strangely comfortable. When they finally left together, the curious looks of the other employees followed the unlikely pair. The executive in fine clothes and the mechanic still in his work uniform, just with a jacket over it. Ethan led her to a small cafe 2 blocks away, a simple but welcoming place with wooden tables and a delicious aroma of freshly ground coffee. It wasn't the type of establishment Sarah would normally frequent, but there was something comforting about the informality of the environment. "I come here almost every day after work," commented Ethan, pulling out the chair for her to sit. "They make the best coffee in the region." Sarah smiled, observing the place with genuine curiosity. "It's charming." While waiting for their orders, An initially uncomfortable silence settled between them. Sarah, accustomed to leading conversations in any social situation, felt strangely at a loss for words in front of this man. "So," she began, looking for a safe topic, "how did you become interested in classic car mechanics?" Ethan's face lit up with the question. "My father had a small shop in a small town. I grew up watching him work on old cars. He said that each vehicle tells a story, not just of the manufacturer, but of the people who owned it." "And the story of my Jaguar? What does it tell about me?" asked Sarah, genuinely interested. Ethan took a sip of coffee before answering. "That you value authentic connections with the past. That beneath the polished surface of the executive, there's someone who appreciates the beauty of what is genuine and lasting." The precision of that analysis left Sarah momentarily speechless. The mechanic continued. "People like you would normally trade that car for a new, flashy model at the first problem, but you care about it because it represents something that money can't buy. Memories, affection, history. Have you always been so observant?" she questioned, feeling simultaneously exposed and understood. "I had to learn to be," replied Ethan with a melancholic smile. "After my marriage ended and I lost the small shop I had with my father, I understood that many times we don't see what's right in front of us." That unexpected confession opened the way for a deeper conversation. Sarah discovered that Ethan had been divorced for 3 years, that he had come to the city to start over after financial problems, and that his dream was to open his own business specializing in vintage cars. In turn, she shared the weight of leading a company as a young woman, the constant expectations on her shoulders, and how the Jaguar represented a time when she could simply be Grandpa William's granddaughter, not the heiress of Morgan Enterprises. The coffee extended for 2 hours, time passing unnoticed as they discovered unexpected affinities, a taste for classic films, a love for outdoor walks, a preference for moments of contemplative silence. "I have to admit," said Sarah as they left the cafe, "I didn't expect to have such a pleasant conversation today." Ethan smiled. "Because I'm just a mechanic?" "No," she replied sincerely, "because it's been a long time since I've had real conversations with someone. The kind of conversation where I'm not thinking about what I should say next to cause the right impression." He nodded, understanding. "I know how it is. Most people are more concerned with seeming interesting than with being truly present." They walked side by side to where the Jaguar was parked. Sarah hesitated before getting into the car, feeling that something important was happening, something she didn't want to interrupt so abruptly. Maybe the car needs a checkup next week," she suggested, with a shy smile that contrasted with her usual confidence. Ethan laughed softly. "Or maybe we can simply arrange another coffee without needing to invent mechanical defects." Sarah felt her face blush slightly. That would be good. They exchanged phone numbers, an apparently simple gesture that, for Sarah, represented a significant break in her usual patterns. As she drove the Jaguar back home, the smooth purr of the engine seemed to echo the accelerated rhythm of her heart. The next day, upon entering the office, Nancy immediately noticed the change. "Looks like they really solved the car problem. I've never seen you so light." Sarah smiled enigmatically. "Yes, they did. And I discovered that sometimes problems lead us to unexpected places." The phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Jessica Vance, her closest friend, and also her only confidant in the business world. "Lunch today? I need to tell you about the latest with the German contract," proposed Jessica. Sarah hesitated, thinking about the message she had exchanged with Ethan that morning, arranging a meeting for the weekend. "Sure," she finally replied, "and I have some news too." While organizing the documents for the morning meeting, Sarah realized that for the first time in a long time, she felt anxious about the future, not only because of professional challenges, but because of something much simpler, and at the same time frighteningly complex. The possibility of a genuine connection with someone who saw her beyond the fortune and the surname. The restaurant chosen by Jessica for lunch was one of those exclusive places where executives closed million-dollar deals between glasses of imported wine and dishes with unpronounceable names. Sarah arrived punctually, as always, and found her friend already settled at the preferred table, next to the window overlooking the inner garden. "You're different," was Jessica's first observation, dispensing with conventional greetings. "There's a strange sparkle in your eyes. Did you close some deal I don't know about?" Sarah smiled discreetly as she sat down. Not everything in life is about deals, Jessica. In our world, practically yes, retorted her friend, raising her glass in a silent toast. But I'm curious, what happened to make you so radiant? For a moment, Sarah considered sharing the experience with Ethan, but something held her back. She knew Jessica well enough to predict her reaction. First would come the shock, then the concern disguised as curiosity, and finally the warnings about social differences and incompatibility of worlds. Grandpa's Jaguar is running perfectly now, she replied, opting for a half-truth. You know how much that car means to me. Jessica nodded, not entirely convinced. It's good to see you happy, even if it's because of an old car. But I have news that will make you even more excited. The conversation drifted to professional matters. The contract with the Germans, rumors about a possible merger between competitors, strategies for the next quarter. Sarah participated actively, as always, but a part of her mind remained in the small cafe in the distant neighborhood, replaying fragments of the conversation with Ethan. Sarah, are you listening to me? Jessica's voice brought her back. I'm talking about Jason Mendez. He specifically asked about you at last week's event. Jason Mendez was the type of man that the board of directors of Morgan Enterprises would consider an ideal match. Heir to a real estate empire, educated at the best universities, with important political connections. I've already said I'm not interested, Jessica. You haven't even given him a chance, insisted her friend. He's intelligent, successful, frequents the same circles as us. At least consider a dinner. Sarah felt a pang of irritation. Do I need to remind you that we're no longer in the 19th century? I don't need marriage alliances to strengthen business. Jessica retreated a bit in the face of the firmness of the response. I just think you work too much. Some company would do you good. The rest of the lunch proceeded without major confrontations, but Sarah felt the weight of the social expectations that always surrounded her. Upon saying goodbye to Jessica, she promised to think about the matter, knowing she wouldn't. The next morning, during a meeting with the board of directors, Sarah was presenting the quarterly results when Anthony Wallace, one of the oldest board members and a close friend of her father, made an apparently unpretentious observation. I noticed that you've been leaving earlier some days. I hope you're not overwhelmed. The comment, made in a paternal tone, carried a subtle accusation that didn't go unnoticed by Sarah. I'm delegating more, as you yourself suggested at the last meeting, she replied with a polite but firm smile. The results show that the strategy is working. The subject was closed there, but Sarah noticed the exchanged glances between some board members. Control over her personal life was one of the prices she paid for the position she occupied. On Saturday, contrary to her usual schedule of social commitments and work email checks, Sarah drove the Jaguar to a park away from downtown where she had arranged to meet Ethan. She had purposely chosen a neutral location, far from both the corporate environment she frequented and the shop's neighborhood. She parked the car and spotted him sitting on a bench in the shade of a leafy tree, wearing jeans and a simple shirt. He seemed absorbed in reading a book, completely at ease in his own company, a quality that Sarah secretly envied. I hope I'm not late, she said as she approached. Ethan looked up and smiled, that same genuine smile that she was beginning to appreciate more than she would like to admit. You're perfectly on time. I arrived early. He put away the book. Sarah noticed it was a biography of Enzo Ferrari and stood up. I thought we might walk a bit, if you agree. There's a lake further ahead with a cafe by the water. Sarah agreed, realizing that she had instinctively chosen more comfortable footwear that morning, as if some part of her already knew it wouldn't be a formal meeting. They walked side by side, initially in silence until Ethan commented on the smooth rumble of the Jaguar's engine when she had arrived. It sounds as it should. You treat it well. I've been following all your recommendations, replied Sarah, feeling a strange pride in this small achievement. Including the gradual warm-up before accelerating, the conversation flowed naturally to other topics. Ethan told about his project to restore an old motorcycle. Sarah shared stories from her childhood spent in her grandfather's garage. There was a simplicity in that interaction that contrasted dramatically with the complexity of her usual relationships. They arrived at the Lakeside Cafe, a charming and unpretentious place. They sat at an outside table, observing some families pedal boating on the water. It must be strange for you, commented Ethan as they waited for their orders. A place so ordinary. Sarah reflected for a moment. Actually, it's comforting. I don't need to be Sarah Morgan here. I can be just Sarah. And who is just Sarah? He asked with genuine interest. The question caught her off guard. When was the last time someone had been interested in knowing her beyond the name and fortune? I'm still discovering that, she admitted with an honesty that surprised herself. For a long time I was what they expected me to be. The perfect heiress, the exemplary executive, the impeccable representative of the Morgan legacy. Ethan observed her with an attention that made Sarah feel simultaneously exposed and welcomed. "And what do you want to be?" he questioned softly. Sarah looked away to the lake, where a child was laughing heartily as her father rowed a pedal boat. Free, maybe. Free to make mistakes without a dozen advisors questioning my decisions. Free to discover what really makes me happy, not just what keeps the company's shares high. The vulnerability of that confession created a moment of intimacy between them. Ethan, instead of offering advice or immediate solutions as so many did, simply nodded with understanding. "I think we all seek that freedom in different ways," he commented. "When my marriage ended and the shop I had with my father closed due to debts, I felt as if I had lost my identity. It took me a while to understand that, as painful as it was also an opportunity for rediscovery." Sarah felt a deep connection with those words. "How did you start over?" "One day at a time," he replied with simplicity. "I learned to separate what really mattered from what was just external expectation. I discovered that some losses, as painful as they may be, free us from paths that weren't truly ours." There was a serene wisdom in Ethan that contrasted with his apparent simplicity. Sarah realized that behind the mechanic with calloused hands, there was a man who had lived enough to understand the complexities of life better than many executives with whom she dealt daily. The afternoon advanced between conversations about books, movies, childhood dreams, and reflections on life. When they finally decided to end the meeting, the sun was already beginning to set, painting the sky in orange tones. "Can I take you home?" offered Sarah, indicating the Jaguar. Ethan visibly hesitated. "I don't know if that would be appropriate." "Appropriate according to whom?" she challenged with a smile. He returned the smile, accepting the invitation. During the journey, Sarah noticed how much Ethan appreciated every detail of the car, the wooden finish of the dashboard, the characteristic smell of the old leather, the constant purr of the engine. "Where to?" she asked, stopping at a traffic light. Ethan indicated a middle-class neighborhood, quite distant from the mansions and luxury condominiums where Sarah's acquaintances lived. When they arrived at the address, a small 3-story building, well-maintained but simple, he seemed momentarily embarrassed. "It's not exactly the type of place you must be used to," he commented. "It's your home," replied Sarah with sincerity. "That makes it special." A silence charged with possibilities settled between them. Ethan looked at her with those eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. "Would you like to come in? I can prepare some coffee." Sarah felt her heart race at the invitation. A part of her, the cautious and calculating executive, warned about the risks of that involvement. Another part, the one that had resurfaced since the first meeting at the shop, yearned to know more about that man and the authentic world he represented. "I'd love to," she finally replied. Ethan's apartment was exactly as she had imagined. Compact, organized with functional simplicity, with some elements that revealed his personality, books about classic cars on the shelf, photographs of landscapes he had taken during travels, a small collection of vintage car miniatures carefully arranged on a shelf. "It was my father who started this collection," he explained, noticing Sarah's interest in the miniatures. "Each one has a story." While Ethan prepared coffee in the small integrated kitchen, Sarah observed the details of that space, so different from her minimalist and impersonal penthouse. There was something welcoming about the simplicity of that home, an authenticity that her own apartment, decorated by a renowned interior designer, had never managed to capture. "Sorry for the delay," said Ethan, returning with 2 cups. "I prefer freshly brewed coffee." They sat on the small sofa, and the conversation resumed the natural flow that always seemed to find between them. Sarah was surprised to find herself talking about fears and insecurities she had never shared even with Jessica. The fear of not meeting expectations, the loneliness of important decisions, the longing for the time when life seemed simpler. Ethan, in turn, revealed his own fears. The trauma of the failure of his marriage and business, the fear of not being able to rebuild his life, the daily struggle to maintain optimism in the face of challenges. "It's strange," commented Sarah, observing the night sky through the apartment window. "We've known each other for such a short time, but I feel like I can be completely honest with you." "Maybe because we don't have expectations of each other," suggested Ethan. "There's no role to play, no image to maintain." When Sarah finally decided it was time to leave, it was already past midnight. A light rain had begun to fall, forming hypnotic patterns on the window glass. "Better wait for the rain to diminish," suggested Ethan. Sarah agreed, although she knew that the rain was just a pretext to prolong that moment. Sitting side by side, observing the drops running down the window pane, they experienced a comfortable silence that spoke more than many conversations. It was Ethan who finally broke the silence, with a question that had been hovering between them since the first meeting. "Why me, Sarah? There are so many men in your social circle, people with whom you share experiences, education, lifestyle. Why are you here, in a simple apartment in an ordinary neighborhood with a mechanic recently arrived from a small town?" The question, made without self-pity or resentment, was genuine. Sarah reflected for a moment, seeking within herself the most honest answer. "Because with you I don't need to be anything beyond what I am," she finally replied. "There are no games, no hidden agendas, no social calculations or expectations of corporate alliances. It's just real." The simplicity of that answer seemed to touch Ethan deeply. Their gazes met, and in an impulse that neither had planned, their lips did too. The kiss was brief, almost hesitant, but carried an intensity that left both momentarily speechless. When they pulled apart, Sarah saw in Ethan's eyes the same mixture of surprise and certainty that she felt. "This complicates things," he commented with a light smile. "Life is already complicated," replied Sarah. "At least this feels right." The rain finally diminished and Sarah knew it was time to really leave. At the apartment door they exchanged another kiss, this time more confident, a silent promise that this would not be the end, but just the beginning of something still indefinable. On the way home, driving the Jaguar through the wet and silent streets of early morning, Sarah felt a mixture of euphoria and apprehension. She knew that what was being born between her and Ethan would face obstacles. Not just the social and economic differences, but the external pressures, the ingrained expectations, the inevitable judgments. But for the first time in years, Sarah Morgan was willing to fight for something that wasn't in any strategic plan of the company, something that couldn't be quantified in financial reports or approved by boards of directors, something frighteningly simple and infinitely complex, the possibility of loving and being loved for what she really was. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and Ethan built a private universe, made of furtive meetings in distant parks, conversations that extended into the early hours, and a complicity that grew with each shared revelation. They kept the relationship discreet, not out of shame, but to protect that still fragile connection from critical looks and hasty judgments. For Sarah, each meeting with Ethan was like breathing cleaner air after years in a suffocating environment. The simplicity with which he faced life, his authenticity in relationships, and the way he valued the small moments brought a perspective that she had long lost amid shareholder meetings and million-dollar negotiations. However, like every story of encounter between different worlds, the challenges were not long in coming. The first collision with reality came through Jessica during a charity lunch organized by Morgan Enterprises. "So it's true," said her friend, in a confidential tone as they served themselves at the appetizer table. "You're really involved with a mechanic." Sarah felt her stomach sink. "How did you know?" "This city is smaller than it seems, especially for people like us," replied Jessica with a sigh. "Olivia Adams saw you in Westside Park with a man who definitely doesn't frequent our circles. Then someone recognized you driving the Jaguar in a distant residential neighborhood." Sarah maintained her composure, although she felt her face burn. "And since when is my personal life a subject for speculation?" "Since always, Sarah. You're a Morgan," retorted Jessica, with a look that mixed concern and disapproval. "I'm not judging, but are you sure you know what you're doing? These romances between different classes are charming in movies, but in real life, people should be free to choose with whom they share their feelings," cut in Sarah, more firmly than she had intended. Jessica retreated a bit, raising her hands in a sign of surrender. I'm just concerned about you and about the company. The board is already commenting on changes in your behavior. My work remains impeccable, Sarah defended herself. For now, replied Jessica, leaving in the air an insinuation that deeply bothered Sarah. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of other guests, but the damage was done. Sarah spent the rest of the event smiling mechanically, while her mind was seething with concerns. She wasn't afraid for herself, but for the pressure that could fall upon Ethan when the relationship became public. That night, during dinner at his apartment, Sarah shared her concerns. People are beginning to talk, she said, distractedly playing with the food on her plate. They found out about us. Ethan observed her attentively. Does that bother you? Not in the way you imagine, she replied, searching for the right words. I don't care what they think of me. But I know how these circles work. They'll start investigating your past, creating rumors, insinuating that you're with me out of interest. A sad smile formed on Ethan's face. Maybe it's inevitable. People like your friend Jessica will never believe that a simple mechanic could have won Sarah Morgan's heart for who he is. The maturity with which Ethan faced the situation only increased Sarah's admiration for him. There was no resentment in his voice, just a realistic observation of the challenges they would face. I don't want you to go through this, confessed Sarah. I don't want them to question your integrity or your feelings. Ethan moved closer, taking her hands in his. Sarah, I went through a complicated divorce and lost everything I had built with my father. Believe me, malicious comments are the least of the problems I've faced. His confidence momentarily reassured Sarah, but she knew the pressure would increase, and she was right. The following week, during a crucial meeting with the board of directors, Anthony Wallace, the oldest board member and a friend of her father, asked to speak with her privately after the session. Sarah, I've worked with your family for more than 30 years, he began in a paternal tone. I watched you grow up and become the brilliant woman you are today. That's why I feel it's my duty to express my concern. She knew exactly where that conversation would lead, but let the man continue. It has come to the board's attention that you are involved with an employee of an auto repair shop, he said, as if announcing a terminal illness. We don't question your personal life, but it's necessary to consider the repercussions for the company's image. Sarah took a deep breath before responding. My personal life doesn't affect my professional competence, Anthony. The company's results remain positive, as you yourself recognized in today's meeting. For now, he replied, using the same expression Jessica had used days before. But there's the contract with the Vance Group. Jason Mendez has shown interest not only in business, but in you personally. An alliance between our companies would be strategic. The insinuation was clear. The board preferred to see her with Jason, heir to another fortune, than with an unknown mechanic. The instrumentalization of her affection for corporate purposes deeply disgusted her. I will not use my personal life as a bargaining chip in negotiations, she declared firmly. And I would like to remind you that my professional performance is the only aspect of my life that is subject to evaluation by this board. Anthony sighed, visibly disappointed with the response. Your father would not be satisfied with this attitude, Sarah. That mention hit a sensitive point. Sarah had always sought her father's approval, even after he had distanced himself from the company. She left the meeting shaken, questioning whether she had the right to put her feelings above the family and corporate expectations she had carried since childhood. Meanwhile, Ethan was facing his own dilemmas. At the shop, colleagues alternated between good-humored provocations and envious comments about his relationship with the rich boss. Some clients began to specifically request his services, curious to meet the mechanic who had won the heart of one of the most powerful women in the city. The situation became even more complicated when he received a tempting proposal to take the position of technical manager at a luxury dealership with a salary 3 times higher than his current one. The offer had clearly arisen because of his connection with Sarah, and the idea of using that connection for his own benefit deeply disturbed him. On a Sunday, while having a picnic in the same park where they had their first official meeting, Ethan shared the situation with Sarah. I refused the offer, he concluded, after explaining the details. I don't want anything that comes because of your name or your position. Sarah felt her heart tighten at that demonstration of integrity, but it was a legitimate opportunity. You're an excellent mechanic. You deserve recognition. "Recognition, yes, favors, no," replied Ethan with conviction. "If I ever manage to open my own shop, I want it to be through my effort, not for being Sarah Morgan's boyfriend." That conversation made Sarah reflect deeply. She realized that, while she feared Ethan would be judged as opportunistic, he was refusing financial opportunities to preserve the authenticity of the relationship. The economic disparity between them created complexities that went beyond social prejudice. It affected the balance of power and the autonomy of both. The crossroads came 2 weeks later, when Morgan Enterprises needed to decide between maintaining a lucrative partnership with a group known for questionable environmental practices or breaking the contract, sacrificing a considerable slice of annual revenue. Sarah convened an extraordinary meeting of the board, where she passionately defended breaking the contract. She presented data on the environmental impact of the partners' operations and proposed a restructuring that would partially compensate for the financial losses. "We cannot compromise our values for immediate profit," she argued. "Morgan Enterprises has always prided itself on its integrity, and that's what I want to preserve." The board members were divided. Some supported Sarah's ethical position, others feared the shareholders' reaction. Anthony Wallace, who initially seemed skeptical, surprised everyone by declaring his support for the proposal. "I recognize the courage of this decision," he said, looking directly at Sarah. "Your grandfather would be proud. He always said that a company without principles is just a money-making machine." The mention of her grandfather deeply moved Sarah. The vote ended in her favor by a narrow margin. At the end of the meeting, Anthony approached her again. "Perhaps I was hasty in my judgment," admitted the board member. "I now see that your friendship with this young man has not negatively affected your discernment. On the contrary." Sarah understood the insinuation. Her coexistence with Ethan, far from compromising her business values, had strengthened them. The integrity she so admired in him was beginning to reflect in her own corporate decisions. That same day, Ethan was also facing a decisive choice. His boss at the shop, pressured by important clients, offered him a partnership in the business. It was the opportunity he had always dreamed of, a path to realize his desire to have his own space specializing in vintage cars. "I know that eventually you'll want to open your own business," said the boss, "but think carefully. Together we can expand this shop and create an exclusive section for classics, with you in charge." The proposal was tempting, and unlike the dealership offer, was based on his recognized talent, not his personal connections. Still, Ethan asked for time to think. That night, he met with Sarah at a small restaurant on the outskirts of the city, a discreet place where they could talk quietly, away from the curious looks that now followed them in more central places. Both shared the events of the day, realizing that, independently, they had faced challenges that tested their most fundamental values. "I think you should accept the partnership," opined Sarah after hearing Ethan's situation. "It's a legitimate opportunity based on your talent." Ethan observed her attentively. "And what about us? If I take on this commitment, I'll have even less free time in the coming months. Building this new sector of the shop will require total dedication." "We'll find a way," replied Sarah with a confidence that surprised them both. "Just as I found the strength to face the board today." There was a new determination in her voice, a certainty that was born not only from the affection she felt for Ethan, but from the understanding that this relationship had made her rediscover values that were buried under years of corporate conditioning. "Something has changed," observed Ethan, noticing the subtle transformation in her gaze. Sarah smiled, intertwining her fingers with his on the table. "I realized I was living in fear. Fear of disappointing expectations, fear of not being perfect, fear of making choices based on what I feel instead of what is expected of me. And now I understand that true courage isn't in following pre-established scripts, but in being faithful to what we believe, even when that means swimming against the current," she replied. "You taught me that without even trying." Ethan gently squeezed her hand. "You transformed me too, Sarah. You showed me that I can dream beyond the limitations I imposed on myself after the failures." That night, under a starry sky, they made plans that didn't ignore future challenges, but incorporated them into the journey they would build together. Ethan would accept the partnership and develop the classic car section at the shop. Sarah would continue leading Morgan Enterprises with the renewed integrity she had rediscovered. A few weeks later, Sarah surprised everyone by arriving at an important charity event accompanied by Ethan. He wore a simple but elegant suit, not a costume to impress, just a formal version of himself. The looks and whispers were inevitable, but the couple faced them with a serene dignity. Jessica, initially uncomfortable, ended up surrendering to Ethan's unpretentious charm during a conversation about the restoration of vintage automobiles. "He really understands the subject," she commented in a moment alone with Sarah. "And he looks at you in a way I've never seen any of your suitors do." Sarah smiled. "Because he sees the person, not the surname or the bank account." The following month, the classic cars section of the shop was inaugurated, attracting collectors and enthusiasts from all over the region. Sarah was there proud, observing Ethan in his element, explaining technical details with passion, sharing stories about rare vehicles, building bridges between seemingly distant worlds through the common love for machines that carried stories. 3 months later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Sarah was driving the Jaguar on rural roads, with Ethan by her side. They stopped at a natural viewpoint, from where they could see the sunset tinging the horizon orange and red. "Remember the first time we met?" she asked, leaning back on the car's leather seat. "When I joked that I would marry you if you fixed the engine?" Ethan smiled, that same serene smile that had captured her heart from the first moment. "How could I forget? It was the most unusual marriage proposal I've ever received." Sarah turned in her seat to face him directly. "And what if it wasn't a joke anymore?" Ethan's gaze met hers, seeking to confirm the meaning of those words. "I'm not saying we should get married tomorrow," continued Sarah, "but I am saying that when I look to the future, it's you I see by my side, not because you fixed the Jaguar's engine, but because you fixed something inside me that I didn't even know was broken." Ethan touched her face delicately. "Are you sure? Your world and mine are still very different." "Our worlds met and created a new one," she replied with simplicity. "One where I can be authentic and you can dream without limits. I don't want to give that up." He kissed her softly, a kiss that carried promises that went beyond words. When they pulled apart, Ethan took from his pocket a small antique key, the kind they don't make anymore. "This belonged to the first car my father fully restored," he explained. "He gave it to me when I opened my first shop, saying it was a symbol of possibilities. After I lost everything, I kept it as a reminder that we can always start over." He placed the key in the palm of Sarah's hand. "It's not a diamond ring, but it represents the same commitment. The promise to build together, to open doors for each other, to believe in possibilities." Sarah closed her fingers around the key, feeling its weight and significance. "It's more valuable than any jewel." The sun was disappearing on the horizon, casting the last golden rays on the couple. Inside the old Jaguar, which had witnessed the beginning of that improbable love story, 2 different worlds continued their journey of fusion, not erasing their differences, but creating from them something new and extraordinarily authentic. The car's engine, silent in that moment of contemplation, seemed to be patiently waiting to take its occupants back to the city, where challenges and prejudices would still exist, but where there would also be space for a story that defied expectations and reminded everyone that true love doesn't respect social conventions or economic barriers. Because, as Ethan had taught Sarah, sometimes what seems complicated has a simple solution. And as Sarah had shown Ethan, sometimes it takes courage to follow the path that the heart indicates, even when all external signs point in another direction. Together, they had discovered the most important of lessons, that between the coldness of business contracts and the warmth of a mechanic's shop, between the luxury of panoramic penthouses and the simplicity of welcoming apartments, between pasts marked by crushing expectations and painful failures, a love could be born capable of rebuilding not only old engines, but also hearts that no longer believed in new beginnings. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Sarah and Ethan has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally engaging stories. Find it here, clicking on the left. If you enjoyed this narrative, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and human relationships. Don't miss our upcoming content. We're eager to read your comments.